This is Watuko Bese again. I hold the title of International Master in Chess. And we are going to now look at the ideas of attacking the strongest pawn in the center. But more importantly, we are going to see how old games, classical games, influenced play up to today, and why it's important to study classical games and to look at them, and to understand what the classical players were thinking. Okay, so here it will be a game that was played by Anderson. Adolf Anderson was a very strong player, very aggressive player, and he played this against Wilhelm Steinitz, and yeah, Steinitz actually lost this game. And what will be important about this game is going to be how a pawn, the white pawn that reaches d5, how it limits the black pieces from getting into the game. So we're talking about space now. Why space is important? After you've attacked the strongest pawn, once you manage to do this, in many cases you get an advantage due to the space that you have, and you also need to have to learn how to play with space. So let us look at this game and see how Anderson played. Okay, the game was played between Anderson and Steinitz, 1862. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, normal moves, bishop b5. As we discussed before, the idea of the move bishop b5 is not necessarily to take the knight on c6, but the idea is to allow white to be able to play the moves, c3 and afterwards d4, to put the white pawns on c3 and then the d2 pawn to d4, so that white attacks black's strongest pawn on e5. So this is basically the idea that white is having when white plays the bishop b5. So the idea of bishop b5 is to move the bishop later on to a4 and maybe to c2 afterwards, and this bishop will then be attacking on the king side. Okay, so Steinitz played knight f6. Yeah, very popular, which is the main line, is the move a6. This is now the so-called Ruy-Lopez. No? White will play bishop to a4, knight f6, and white will castle, and so on and so on and so on. Yeah, that is the Ruy-Lopez. But in this game, Steinitz played knight f6. It's interesting that later on, years later, in a match between Kasparov against Kramnik introduced a similar setup to play the so-called Berlin defense, and Kasparov didn't manage to deal with it effectively during the match. Yeah. All right. So castles, knight takes e4, and now white plays d4. Notice that white is not panicking that he's lost the pawn, because the king is still in the center. And, Anderson sees that he's going to be able to play rook e1 and then attack in the center. So now, notice that now, after he plays the move d4, he is sort of successfully attacking the strong pawn on e5, which is black's strongest pawn. Okay, Steinitz played the move bishop e7. More popular today is the move knight d6. This is now, what Kramnik played against Kasparov, which is the Berlin, takes on c6, d takes c6, d takes e5, knight f5, queen takes d8, king takes d8. And yeah, this is the so-called the Berlin variation of the Ruy-Lopez. And yeah, it's very popular today. But okay, Steinitz played bishop e7. So now Anderson plays the move d5. We need to understand why. Well, he says that he's going to take the pawn on e5. So the pawn on d5 is important because it comes with a tempo, with a free move, because the knight will have to move. And after the knight moves, he will then be able to take on e5. Yeah, so, okay, Steinitz plays the move knight b8. Knight takes e5, castles, rook e1, knight f6, knight c3, d6, and knight goes to f3. So let us look at this position. Now we immediately see that white has successfully attacked black's strongest pawn, and white has got a slight advantage because of small space advantage. Now, very important is to notice these pawns right here. The pawn on d5, which is sort of holding these pawns on d6, c7, b7, and a7. Yeah, this formation is it looks like there's nothing going on, but actually it's very difficult to get out of this structure as black, because you know your knight cannot move out, your knight cannot go to c6, and you cannot contest the e file as black. So there is a lot of problems to solve, you know, in that position. And yeah, so which explains why Steinitz played the move c6 immediately, trying to break. Okay, Anderson plays bishop a4, of course, still keeping the space. It's not advisable to take because, you know, if you take, for an example, on c6, d takes c6, yeah, black will take back with the pawn, and afterwards, black will play the move d5. And black has got actually a pawn in the center. And we could argue, of course, that this pawn is weakened, a7, but black has got the b file, and generally black's pieces can come into the game pretty quickly. So yeah, this is not what white is looking for. So it explains why after the move c6, Anderson played the move bishop a4. Right? So bishop g4 was then played. He's trying to obviously exchange pieces to try and get out. Because if you don't have space, you know, your pieces they sort of get in each other's way. Yeah. So he's trying to exchange as many pieces as he can. Now Anderson plays queen e2, a very strong move, because now he's actually attacking here on the e file. It's also easy now for black. I mean, if black plays a move like, let us say, rook e8, then bishop g5 is very strong. And now the threat is to take on f6, because then if you take with the bishop, the rook on e8 will hang. And you cannot move your knight because c6 will be taken. If you move bishop f8, I can play just bishop takes f6, and this is not good for black at all. So we can see that black is under a lot of pressure after queen e2. He plays bishop takes f3, and Anderson takes back with the g pawn. So the bishop is attacked, rook e8, bishop g5. There's a problem. He cannot get out. He cannot move his pieces out. He cannot play bishop f8 because of bishop takes f6. He cannot play knight d7 because c6 is hanging. So he tries the move b5. And now he takes bishop takes f6, g takes f6, takes on c6, and plays the very strong move c7. This is a strong move because, of course, if you play queen takes c7, he has the move knight d5. And immediately we can see patterns here. For example, I'm threatening to take the bishop. I'm also threatening knight takes f6 check. But maybe I'll just take knight takes e7 check with a good position. So Steinitz plays queen d7, takes on b8, and then plays knight d5. Yeah, this position actually is much better for white. But Steinitz had very strong defensive skills. And he actually starts to defend very stubbornly And, he was very close to getting a draw in this position, which is quite surprising. He plays the move King F8, very strong move. Queen E3. Now, after Queen E3, he plays King G7, stopping Queen H6 check. Knight takes E7, Rook B5. Notice that he has caught Anderson in a pin, and the Rook is threatening to move to E5, and he can take back his piece. So Knight F5 check is played. Rook takes F5. And now we see that taking on E8 is very dangerous, because if Queen takes E8, maybe I can play the move Rook G5 check. And here White will have two possible variations, to play King H1 or to play King F1. Yeah, King H1 doesn't look promising, because after Queen H3, you're going to get checkmated. And if you play King F1, unfortunately, after Queen H3 check, King E2, Rook E5 check, yeah, Black has chances in this game, because your own king will also be a bit weak. So yeah, Steinitz is defending very actively with Rook takes F5. So Queen D3, Rook E5, King H1. Yeah, around here he could have played stronger, Steinitz, but anyway, Spearman managed to, Anderson managed to win the game. Yeah, I'm just playing through the game so that you just see how it continued, but it's not interesting to us, and he resigned here anymore, because more important for us was the middle game, the opening middle game, which is the idea of, after you're out of the opening, you ask yourself, what do I do now? The answer is very simple. You attack the strongest pawn. What is the strongest pawn? The strongest pawn is the opponent's pawn that is attacking the center. It may be the E pawn, the D pawn, the C pawn, or sometimes even the F pawn. Yeah, so any pawn that is advanced and that attacks the center, you try to see how you can attack it, most probably with another pawn. Yeah, and that should be your plan, basically. And here in this game, we saw then the idea of space, how to continue when the pawn is on D5, how we can then use the space to limit the opponent from moving out and developing their pieces. Okay, the next game we're going to look at was a game I played in Hastings against Duhayon, a player from Belgium. His rating is about 2260, around there. And yeah, basically in this game I got a chance to use one of the ideas from the Anderson game against Steinitz. Okay, let's look at it. So I played E4, he played E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, Knight F6. Basically also trying to go for the Berlin. Okay, I played D3. Nothing wrong with allowing the Berlin, but in this game I just felt like playing with all my pieces, not to go into an end game. So D3 is a normal move. Of course, when White plays D3, White is just simply defending this pawn, but White has not, forgotten his main plan, which is to castle and develop his pieces, and then at the end of the day, White will play again the pawn to C3 and the pawn from D3 to D4, and still attack the strongest pawn on E5 by Black. So it's still according to plan. Okay, so my opponent played the move D6. I castled. Then he played the move G6 to develop his bishop. So as discussed before, I played the move C3. We can understand what this plan is all about. The idea is obviously to facilitate the move D4 at the right moment. The opponent plays bishop g7, I play rook e1. In these type of structures, rook e1 is very much a move that it's a typical move, you know, because when you play rook e1, you do two things. Number one, you overprotect e4, meaning that you are now ready to play the move d4. Not yet, because you still have your pieces are still, you know, not developed. When you are ready, you'll play the move d4, defending the move the pawn e4 with the rook on e1. And point number two, you have vacated the square f1. This square is very important for this knight on b1, because remember, when you play the move c3, remember I said that one of the key things of positional play is to pay attention to the smallest detail in the position. So, you know, white has played the move c3, we know to play d4, but the disadvantage of this move c3 is that the knight does not have the c3 square available anymore. So that is why this knight in many cases will go first to d2, and afterwards it will move to f1, and from f1 there is a chance that the knight can go to e3 or maybe to g3 to attack the king. But more importantly, this knight will then be in a position where it can actually be strong. Okay, so you'll notice that after the move c3, the knight does not have a good square, because you know the knight cannot go to c3 because the pawn is now on c3. So the idea is to move the knight to d2, to f1, to e3, or to g3. You know, so rook on e1 helps white to carry out this plan of improving the position of the knight. Okay, my opponent castled, and now I played the move h3. Yeah, h3, there are two ideas behind h3. The first idea is that it's basically a waiting move. I want to see what my opponent will play, and I'm not really making my position worse. And anyway, anytime I want to play d4, there's a possibility that my opponent could play bishop g4 and pin me. So that's why I play h3, just to stop this pin. My opponent plays bishop d7. And roundabout now, you know, we have to pay attention, because now bishop d7, you know, it kind of, there's an idea to stop the move d4. So for an example, if white plays d4, okay, this would not be a good move because white is not yet ready, because all the pieces are not in the game. But let us imagine that white plays d4, so that we can see what black's idea might be. Black will play knight takes d4. Now the bishop on b5 is hanging. If you play knight takes d5, black will take with the pawn. And if you take bishop takes d7, black will take on f3 check and then take the bishop, and you lose a pawn. So this explains why in the game I played the move bishop a4. Okay, to defend my bishop with my queen there, and at the same time to be able to play bishop c2. Okay, my opponent plays the move queen e8. This move is a very interesting move, and I must admit, if you have not seen many games by strong players and ideas, you will not be able to guess what the opponent's idea is after the move queen e8. You see, the idea of queen e8 is basically it's linked with this diagonal over here. Okay, this idea, you know, it's borrowed from openings like the King's Indian defense. Basically, I'll just, you know, move white's pieces backwards and forwards so that we can see what black's idea is. Imagine white plays just this move. Black will play knight h5, and then black will play f5. This is the idea. Now, if white takes here, notice that the queen defends the knight. If the queen had not been here, if the queen had been on d8, white could have played knight takes e5, followed by queen takes h5. Okay, so that is the idea of the move queen e8. And as I said, such ideas, you should not panic if you don't, you should not ask yourself, well, how am I going to see this idea? It's very simple. You need to look at more and more games by strong players, games by players of the past and so on, so that you can absorb the ideas that were used in those games. Okay, now let's go back to the game. So during the game I saw this idea, of course, and I cannot stop it, because if I try to play a move like g4, this will make my kingside too weak. Yeah, it will just weaken my kingside horribly. g4, my opponent can play a move like h5, and already I'm in big trouble. Big trouble. So I cannot play a move like g4 to stop knight h5. Generally, it's very difficult to stop your opponent from making moves in their own territory. Because remember, I control the first rank to the fourth rank. My opponent controls the fifth rank to the eighth rank. So if their plan is in their territory, it's difficult for you to stop it, really. The only thing, one of the things you can do is you can ask yourself, well, what is the disadvantage of my opponent's plan? So the disadvantage is that when the knight moves away from f6, because remember we have said in past lessons that when a knight is on f6 and the other one is on c6, that they control 16 squares together. So when the knight moves away from f6 to h5, it loses some control in the center. So that is why I played the move knight d2. My idea is to move my knight to f1, then to e3, and then to d5. So my opponent played the move knight h5 following his plan. I played knight f1, king h8. It's just getting out of the diagonal, because you have to be careful. Because remember, the opponent must look at the whole board. And if he pushes this pawn, he's worried that, okay, before you make a move like f5, you have to say, what are the changes to my position? And the changes to the position are that the king is all of a sudden open. Okay? So we have a situation where there could be a so-called, where there is an open check. This is something that you have to see during the game. If I push this pawn, I open for my king. And there are possibilities. Maybe I can play queen b3 check and take on b7. All these are possible ideas that the opponent could play if you're not careful. So, which explains why my opponent plays the move king h8 first. Okay, I play knight to3, knight f4, and now I play knight d5. So this is, I'm countering this plan. Yeah, my knight sits on d5, and I'm also attacking the pawn on c7 and the knight on f4. So my opponent takes, knight takes d5, and now I play e takes d5. And now you need to think back to the game between Anderson against Steinitz, where Anderson had the pawn on d5, and Steinitz had d6, c7, b7, and a7. And we talked about space, the space advantage. So I'm working now on this space advantage. Okay. So my opponent plays knight e7, I play bishop b3. Of course, I don't want to exchange pieces because I have more space. My opponent plays queen d8, he's getting out of the e file. And now I play the move d4. Again, attacking the strongest pawn. He takes, knight takes d4. Now we're starting to see what my plan is going to be. It's a simple plan. I'm planning to use space. My pawn on d5 limits my opponent's pieces, and I am going to come up with ideas of how to put pressure on black's queenside. Okay, let us see what happens. He plays knight f5. Okay, I don't want to take this knight as yet, because if I take the knight, it takes back with the bishop, and this bishop is centralized. So I play the move knight f3, knight h4, and now do I play the move bishop e3. Knight takes f3, queen takes f3, queen f6, queen e4. My idea of playing queen e4 is that I want to play the move queen c4 or queen b4, and I'm going to harass these pawns on the queen side, because it's very difficult for him to get out, because that pawn on d5 is really holding those pawns. Rook e8, so queen c4, he plays queen d8. Right, so now we come to the stage of how to exploit space advantage. How do you improve your position? Well, we've learned from past masters that what you do is you look at your position and you're looking at your pieces, and you are trying to find suitable squares for your pieces, because you see, in a position like this, it is unlike a position where you are taking the king. So there's time to maneuver, to put a piece, to take two moves for a piece to move from this square to that square, from this diagonal to that diagonal, from this file to that file. It's about setting up of the pieces first. So what you're looking at is you take a look at your own pieces and you say, well, which pieces am I unhappy with? Which pieces are not contributing to my my position becoming better? Well, that's one. Number two, you're looking at your opponent's plans, and you are saying, well, which move or rather plan would my opponent play if it was his turn to play? And if you look at here, this position, the opponent would love to play two moves, bishop to f5 and then rook to e4. Why? Very simple. The opponent is unhappy with the rook. Let's do the same thing. What you are doing in your position, you must also do you must also obviously expect that the opponent is doing the same. Yeah, many players play without regarding the opponent. They don't treat the opponent as a strong player. They just think about what they want. This is a mistake. So whatever it is that you can think about, the opponent can do too. So the opponent is also looking for opportunity to get his pieces also into the game. So this rook on f8 is not working. The opponent is not happy with the rook on f8. So he wants to play, say, bishop f5, attacking the center, rook e4, attacking my queen, and then rook e8, controlling the e file and then improving the position of his pieces. So that is why I played the move bishop c2, stopping the move bishop f5. And my bishop on b3 was anyway not doing anything because it was hitting the pawn on d5, my own pawn. So my opponent plays a5. Okay, he's worried about this pawn on a7 because my bishop on e3 is attacking this pawn. I play the move a4. I'm fixing the pawn on a5, and there are still problems because notice that my queen on c4 is better placed than his queen. His queen is defending c7. My queen on c4, yeah, is slightly more active. It's closer to the center. My opponent plays king g8. I improve my position, the position of my pieces. Which piece is not in the game? The rook on a1. This rook is not in the game. So we put the rook on d1. Of course, my opponent plays rook e5. So now I play bishop d4 to exchange this strong rook on e5. Rook takes e1, rook takes e1, rook e8. Okay, I trade, rook takes e8, bishop takes e8. Now, a new position has come about. We see bishops. It's now a question of which bishops are better and what is the plan. Well, this bishop on g7 is okay in the middle game, but now we are moving slowly towards the end game, and it's not really that strong, because there's a pawn on c3 and another pawn on b2, blocking this bishop. So I play the move bishop e3 because I've got a plan to play also maybe later on bishop to d2 and to put my pawn on b4. The idea is very simple. If the opponent takes, I take back, and then I want to create a pass pawn on the a file. If my opponent does not take on b4 but plays b6, I will exchange, and then my bishop on d2 will later on maybe put pressure on the pawn on a5. It's a very simple plan, but it's effective. Why? Because I've got space. So my opponent plays bishop d7, and now I play the move b4. As explained, he plays b6, and now bishop d2. Bishop d2 is a strong move. Why? It's eyeing a potential weak pawn on a5. I'm attacking on the queen side. Why am I attacking on the queen side and not on the king side? Simple. You attack where you have more space. It's logical because your opponent cannot counter. No? So obviously I'm playing on the queen side because my pawn on d5 facilitates this. My pawn on d5 allows me to play on the queen side because I've got more space there. So my opponent plays h5, not a problem. I take on a5, and now queen b3. I want to play the move c4, but more importantly, I want to play the move queen b7, and just controlling the 7th rank as well as the b file. My opponent plays queen a8. Right. It's also very important, again, after the opponent moves, to ask yourself, well, how could my opponent improve their position? The opponent could play the move maybe queen a7 and maybe queen c5 to improve the position of his queen, because he's got two problems, the pawn on a5 and the pawn on c7. So if he moves his queen to a7 and afterwards to c5, he's still defending both pawns when he's on c5, but he would be doing it from a much more active position. Yeah. So of course I must stop this idea, and I did this by playing the move bishop e3. Okay. So my opponent now plays the move c5. Yeah, he sort of is under pressure, and he sort of collapses. But okay, if he didn't play the move c5, maybe I will just simply play bishop d3 and then bishop b5. No, and then queen c4, more pressure on c7, because this bishop is now, or maybe there are many ideas here. Maybe even queen c4 could be an idea. Yeah, but it's a very comfortable position to play with as white. Yeah, or maybe just c4 and attack the a5 pawn. Many ideas. Anyway, he plays c5, and now he makes the pawn on d6 weak. I play queen b6, bishop e5, c4, king g7, f4, and we win a pawn. Yeah, okay, the rest of the game is not interesting anymore. We're just going to move very quickly, because it's just a question of being careful not to blunder anything. And here, I actually managed to win the pawn. So the big lesson in this game is actually two things. Number one, attacking the strongest pawn. Number two, space. And what you do when you have space, stopping your opponent from exchanging pieces, improving the position of your pieces that are not so well placed, and also just using the space to put pressure on your opponent.